to talk about or share?
Well, I have a feeling I'm going backwards instead of forwards sometimes. It's kind of um, frustrating because I have encountered God. I know that in my head, but lately it's this veil is coming over me, this deception that thoughts are coming in saying you've never experienced anything, you've never seen anything, you've never encountered anything, and I'm going, oh, so my brain's shredding things. Why is my brain shredding things? How can I get over this stuff again? It's, you know, I'm listening to your stuff and doing rest and that, and hopefully, my brain will catch up or something. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would rather than think it's the problem with your own thinking, think of it as doubt, unbelief, which is trying to just draw you back into wrong thinking. Because at the end of the day, you plant the testimonies that you have within the garden of your heart and see them flourish so that they become permanent. So your brain will only shred information that's not relevant or important. It won't shred good stuff that you value. And if you plant it in the garden of your heart as a testimony, then it's going to be a permanent record of your experiences and encounters with God that you can always draw on and will never get lost. The brain does shred, hippocampus does shred information, and a lot of the spiritual information that is received does get shredded because it's not anchored anywhere. So, your spirit will be passing information to your mind continually. But if you've not learned to tune into that information, then some of it won't become cognitive. But a lot of it doesn't need to become cognitive. You see, you don't need to know everything cognitively that your spirit is doing or is going on spiritually. So how do you not lose that which is something you don't cognitively know? Well, what I do is I plant in the garden of my heart the record of what my spirit is doing, even if I don't know what it is. I don't have to know everything. I can generally, in a sense, choose to spiritually engage, to store what my spirit is engaging in heaven, receiving, doing, activating, and store it within the garden of my heart so that when it needs to be released and the fruit of those experiences need to be actually experienced cognitively and perhaps shared with other people, they're always available. I used to only plant what I remembered, and what I would do, and I would plant that testimony of my experience that I did cognitively. But actually, then I thought, well, my spirit is operating in the realms of heaven all the time, multiple places. Well, what happens to all that information? Well, the spirit doesn't forget it, but how is it going to be linked to the soul? Well, you have this quantum entanglement. So there is a flow from heaven to the earth. So my spirit and soul can be in agreement, and my spirit can communicate with the soul to release things. But actually, wouldn't it be good to actually have within my heart, within the garden of my heart, a record of those things that my spirit is doing? So I just do that, just basically now and again, just plant the seeds of everything that I don't know, that they will also produce fruit that will also be available when I need to eat it or partake of it or give it away. So really, it's about being intentional about a lot of these things. The more intentional we are, and the more we actually choose to engage something, the more that actual engagement will become a reality in our lives when we need it, at whatever time we need it. And there may be things my spirit's doing I don't need to know, cognitively, and I won't need to know maybe for years or never. But actually, there are some things which would be very beneficial to know when the time is right. And it's like my spirit will release that, but it's easier if it's stored within the garden of my heart, that the fruit of it can actually be then taken. So it's just a matter of choosing to store spiritual information as well as, physical information, and just choose that reality where you're going to have everything stored and nothing's going to be lost and nothing will be shredded. And the mindset that says, oh no, I'm going to lose all this, that's what creates the fear and the doubt. Oh no, I'm going to lose what and now I don't believe I even saw anything. It's like, daily engage in the garden of your heart and feast on what you have already experienced. Let it be a source of life to you, a source of testimony that then inspires you to continue, and to pursue the non-cognitive spiritual engagement with it, of living in dual realms without ever really needing to know all the time what you're doing. I record everything I do in a cognitive way. I journal it. So I always have a record of what I've done. And then I then plant those journals in the garden of my heart. And I also then plant my spiritual journal, if you like, which is in my spirit, not in my physical realm, also as a record. So nothing ever gets lost. But you aren't going backwards. It's just sometimes it can appear to that. And sometimes we're in seasons where there's less activity in certain ways than there are in others. And that's okay. When you go through a season that God wants you to focus on rest rather than activity, then trying to do the activity goes against the focus on rest. And rest is, hey, just rest in my goodness and in my, trust me in this, that you aren't going backwards, that I'm taking you forwards, that things are increasing, because there's no end to the increase with God. So you're never going to shrink back when you're walking with God, because there's no end to that increase. You just have to trust him that he will enable you to go through the seasons in your life that you need to go through, and then you can rest in those seasons. And that is seasonality with God is really, really important. And therefore, when God wants to bring us into a new season, hey, we don't want to hold on to the previous season and, through fear or comfort or whatever it might be. We want to embrace the new season. But sometimes those new seasons can be different. It's like sometimes they're like summer or spring, and sometimes they're like winter. You say, oh, I don't really like the winter season. Well, we need it. If you didn't have a winter season, a lot of the plants that we grow wouldn't actually grow. If you're living in a tropical environment, then you don't have that winter, and the plants there don't need winter. But in our lives, we need all the seasons at the right point and the right time. And God is very capable of, bringing us into new seasons, particularly if we're open and proactive about it. I'm always asking God to do whatever he needs to do in me to enable me to fulfill whatever I'm called to do. So sometimes that is, hey, we're going to go through a season of difference. It's not one's better or worse than the other. They're just different, and they have different purposes and different functions. And when we trust him, we won't fight or resist those seasons. And sometimes some of those seasons are less active than others. And sometimes there are seasons to establish, and sometimes they're to maintain and bring things into order so that you'll be ready to move on to another season. So don't be robbed of all of the positive things that God has done, and just continue to be open and available for him to do whatever he wants to do, and go with the flow of that.
Thanks, Mike. That's encouraging.
Okay. Mike,
Yep.
God looks at the heart,
Yep.
and I understand his heart is your consciousness. And if I took someone like David, because I guess the way of it is because of neural pathways, his thoughts and resulting behavior sometimes was not very good. But yet God saw something. God looked at his heart, and I probably God looks at hearts of people that don't even know him. And he likes the heart that he sees. I'm assuming. And so my question there is, what is? Do you have any kind of thoughts for what God is looking at that we can't see because we're looking at behaviors and things like that?
Yeah. Well, when God's looking at the heart, he's looking at the state of our heart from a point of ground, like this parable of the sower. So he's looking at, are there areas of our heart which are hard and therefore resistant? Are there areas of our heart which are stony, therefore have got things in them which are going to stop fruitfulness? Are there things in there like worry and anxiety and fear, which are again are going to stop the good seed falling into good ground to produce good fruit? And so he's aware that our hearts are in a process of restoration and renewal, and they're not all fixed. So when he's looking at our heart, he's looking at, well, what soil are we operating in? Are we operating in the good soil? And therefore, the motives of our heart in good soil is always going to come out of a place of love, joy, and peace. Or are we operating in this instance out of fear, which is, not coming in love, joy, and peace? So therefore, the motive that drives us in fear is not going to produce good fruit. So he's always looking at what is the motive and intention of our heart that is a deeper level than just the manifestations of behaviors, out of the automatic system of reactions. So he's really looking for us to respond with a connection with his heart. So are we heart to heart? Are our desires aligned? And again, there may be just an area that he's focusing on at any one point in time, and the rest of our life could be a mess. But that area, we're totally aligned with his heart, and there's fruitfulness in that area. When we look at people's mess, we struggle to see any fruitfulness in it because we're looking at the from an external perspective of their life. Now, I remember people prophesying over me in the past that their lives were a mess. They were addicted. They'd met God, but they hadn't broken their addictions. They were still up and down, a mess. And yet they said the most profound things to me. And I'm like, well, you shouldn't be saying something like that to me. Look at your life. It's like the temptation is not to listen because, well, that can't be God, because look at the mess you're in. Whereas actually that heart connected with the heart of God and in obedience, I guess, released that, and that was fruitful. So, there may be hard areas, there may be stony areas, there may still be, weedy areas of anxiety and worry, but there's good soil in there. And God is really looking to see the good soil increase. And the good soil is what produces the good fruit, even though there may be a lot of other things. In that area, the motives of your heart are aligned with his, and he is blessed by that. But of course, he does want our hearts to be restored and made whole and healed, and not have fear or anxiety or worry and lack of trust, and not have areas where we still have memories and hurts and trauma and all of those things. But that's an ongoing journey and a process. And, when we do embrace something which is out of the desires of God's heart, it then inspires us, I believe, to pursue having more of that, because it's a testimony of, hey, that was good. That felt good, actually fulfilling something that God called me to do. Because I took my eyes off my circumstances and all the mess, and I just focus on that, and the more we do that, the more we will become like the things we look at. And when our attention is always on the negative, then the negative just gets blown out of proportion. When we actually start on the positive and keep focusing there, then it puts the negative in proportion and then can change it, because we're then in a place where we're living in expectation of change and transformation, even though it's a process and a journey. So when God looks at our hearts, he's only looking at the good bits, but he doesn't overlook the rest of it from the point of it's still there, but he's looking always for those good bits to produce fruit. And so we will be fruitful, but he also wants us to fill things and to grow and to increase. So for us, that means more of our heart being good soil and producing more good fruit. And he does that by loving us into that, not by condemning us into it. So whenever people feel guilty, shamed, or condemned, that is not coming from God. That is not the way he motivates us. He motivates us by inspiring us because of the pleasure of his heart towards us. And then when we do fulfill something, that just affirms, hey, it's great when we can outwork and fulfill our destiny and find contentment and peace and rest in that. But most people look at the negatives and the behaviors and then dismiss the rest because, well, how can you possibly be doing anything for God, and look at the mess you're in, and that's not how God views it, but he does want us to go into a process of renewal and transformation and healing and health, so that our hearts are purified and refined and not fragmented and broken, damaged, and full of the mixture. The pure in heart are those whose hearts have less mixture. They're pure and not mixed. Now it takes a bit of a refining process to bring all the impurities to a place free from the whole, so they can be skimmed off. And that's the crucible that we often go through to bring us to the place where the things rise to the surface can be scooped off. It does take some heat sometimes, and God's at work in all that to bring good out of it all. So I guess you could say he's looking at the motives of our heart, which are aligned with his, and that brings pleasure to his heart.
Mike, your experience of divine health.
Yeah.
I assume something happened with your neural pathways that they were properly aligned with divine health.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about unconditional love flowing through there, things like that, because it's everything. Love's light, transforming us, set us free. So just taking it as an example, divine health. Do you have problems or issues at times where you have symptoms where you might feel that you're sick that you have to deal with, or are you just flowing in it all the time? That's it. Like, I'm even thinking of God's unconditional love. I hear people often saying, oh, I move in God's love, I flow in God's love, but if I watch their words in their mouth or whatever, I don't really see that. You know what I mean? I'm just wondering, do you get to a natural flow? Is it always something that you have to be conscious of? And taking divine health as the example, I remember being with a faith pastor one time, and he was sick, and he said to me, before the congregation, these are just symptoms, I'm not really sick, but he was sick.
Yeah, that's denial, and denial is not really what God wants us to live in. If you don't own where you are, now I'm not saying you own and say it's my sickness, but if you're in denial that that's the reality, then how's it going to change? If you don't say, I need this to change and to align with true reality, which would be health. I believe true reality from God's perspective is that we live in health. Now, yes, it took time for my neural pathways to align with that. And, I had to come to the point where I knew that health was my inheritance as a child of God. It wasn't something I had to earn or deserve or do something for. It was my inheritance, and when I know my identity as a child of God, then that inheritance is part of it. But that doesn't mean that we should get lazy or presumptive about it. It's like if I was to eat, a bag of sugar every day, I would get unhealthy quite quick because I would be abusing the body that God has given me, and I would be using that for meeting some sort of need in me, which is not healthy and is not coming from the source of God. So you've got to be sensible to see that divine health is not something which is disconnected to how we live, how we think, what we eat, and how we operate in peace or joy or love. And if I was to be anxious, stressful, it would have an effect on my physical body. It would on anyone's physical body, because it would be producing chemicals that are stressors that would have a negative effect, and that would be negative. But I don't live from stress, all that sort of stuff. So I live from a place of rest. So that is a positive thing to my physical body. And therefore my physical body is aligned to how I feel and how I think, not the other way round. But I don't make a presumption. And I don't also presume that nothing can ever happen. Now disease, sickness, any of those things are are in the world around me. So people carry things. I may come in contact with them. So I legislate for the reality that anything that comes against me will not prosper. So if there's a virus, it will die when it comes in contact with me. It won't have access to me because I have a boundary around my life, if you like, which is love. And I create an atmosphere around my life with rivers of living water flowing every day, which is love and joy and peace. So that really doesn't give much room, but I do consciously choose to engage that and live in accordance to it. And my thinking is aligned to that. So I'm protected. So I trust God, seek first his kingdom, and trust his protection in my life. So it's not that nothing could happen, but I'm not in faith for something to happen. And I do believe, as I am in relationship with God, that he is protecting and directing and guiding and providing for me. So my relationship with God is the outworking of that divine health. It's not a formula. So, if I wasn't walking with God in intimacy and in relationship, then I could potentially be open to things outside of, because I'd be walking my own path. So I've learned to walk closer and closer with God. Initially, I just believed it, and then I had to deal with the reality of it. And that pretty much was, I had a strong will, I've got a strong sense of things. So I held on to it, and then I resisted anything that was in opposition to it. But that actually was not rest. I was having to resist and use the reality of my beliefs to oppose anything that the enemy came. So there was always this, well, I have got a protection around me, but now I live in rest. I trust in God's protection. But I do live sensibly. I get enough sleep. I try and eat relatively healthily. I'm not in bondage to anything in that way. I'm not addicted to anything food wise or in that way. I look to get some exercise. I like to walk in the fresh air. So some of it is a healthy lifestyle overall that contributes to that way of living. Now, I can damage myself, and I quite regularly do, particularly when I'm in the garden. I was in the garden at the weekend because we had some nice weather, and I was out there doing some stuff. I mean, I've got all sorts of scratches and cuts and stuff on me from, hacking away at brambles and building some fences and, dealing with screws and nails and hammers and all sorts of stuff. But when I do damage myself, I believe for restoration and a speedy restoration. So I believe in no infection, but occasionally something happens and you then have to deal with it. And that's when you got to take captive the thought, and don't let the thought run away with you. Oh no, oh no, this is. So do I get sick? No, not really, no. But I don't have any expectation of being sick. Do I occasionally have a symptom? Very, very, very occasionally, I might have a symptom. And if I recognize any symptom, then I just take authority over it and it's gone, you know. But I also take communion every day, and I'm taking on the life of God, which deals with any genetic and epigenetic factors. I'm conscious, in focusing on living in the divine protection and health and blessing of God, and I frame my life in accordance to it. So I'm not just making assumptions. I am actually ruling and reigning in my life, and in that way, I'm sensitive to anything that's going on. Because you get thoughts. I mean, this bit on my arm, I jabbed a rusty screw into it, so there's a big bruise, and and it dug into my arm, but I just let it bleed a little while, and I had no expectation. Oh no, have I got my tetanus shots up to date? Oh no, and all of a sudden you're then thinking in accordance to fear. Well, I didn't at all. It hurt a bit, and it was like, oh, okay. I'm actually, this is going to be restored, and restored quickly. So my mindset is one of restoration and coming back into health and wholeness. I don't take on any fear-based things which could hinder or stop that. So taking captive the thought is the key, because thoughts will come all the time, and you cannot stop thoughts coming from the outside, because that's when the thoughts come from now, because I've got rid of the ones that may have been on the inside. So in this instance, this is exactly what happened. This happened, I saw what it was, a rusty old screw. It dug quite deep into my arm. I've got a pretty high pain tolerance, so, I just carried on. But the thought came, and the thought was tetanus. That was the thought that came into my mind immediately. And then I took captive the thought, and it's like, no infection will enter my body through this. This will be restored. I speak life to this, and then I carried on and got on with doing what I was doing. But if I dwelt on that thought, and if I entertained that thought, then I could have talked myself into going to the hospital and needing a tetanus shot. But I didn't entertain the thought. I rejected the thought. I continued the thought for health and wholeness, and my expectation is that this is going to be restored and made whole. Now sometimes, occasionally something happens that you're unaware of, and you don't really deal with, because you're doing something else, and you're too busy doing something else, and you're not aware, and you don't deal with it quick enough. And that happened a couple of years ago. It happened, and I was traveling back from New Zealand. I'd been over there for a few weeks, and I'd been pretty busy, and I was just relaxing on the way back, and I wouldn't be paying attention to an awful lot. And by the time I'd got back, I noticed that my back was a little bit sore. Now, not sore as in, pain from a back problem, but it felt uncomfortable in the seat, and I didn't know what it was. And, and I was aware that, it was there, but I couldn't see it, because you can't see what's in your back, could you? So, I just sort of thought, oh, okay, I'll sort it out when I get home. And now I remembered that I had a little tiny little lump on my back, which was, I thought was, oh, just a little cyst or something or whatever. And I couldn't really reach it, or I couldn't really do anything to it, and it wasn't hurting. So I didn't really pay much attention to it. Well, what that was a blocked pore. And on the way back from New Zealand, whatever happened, this block pore was infected. And so, you know, now again, I have a high tolerance for pain. So it was a bit uncomfortable, but it wasn't really that bad. So I just sort of dismissed it, and I was more concerned with, getting home. And I got home, and my wife sort of said, "Oh, what's that on your back?" I said, "Oh, I don't know. It's just felt a bit sore." She said, "Well, it's all red, and it doesn't look very good. You need to deal with it. You need to get it. You need to go to the doctors and get it dealt with." So at that point, I couldn't see it, and so it was quite difficult to focus. But anyway, in the end, it was like it got sorer. So I thought, okay, how am I going to deal with this? Well, I was going to I think I was going I was going to a holiday to New York and Disney with my grandchildren and stuff. And 3 days later, so it was like, oh, I haven't even got time to deal with it now. Um, you know, so, but I thought, no, I'm going to. Now, this is where you got to be wise. Now, I could have said, okay, I'm just going to ignore it, or I'm going to pray against it, or I'm going to whatever. But it's like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going on a holiday. I want a good time. I don't want to be focused about this back. So I went to the nurse, and I said, look, can you see what it is? She said, well, yeah, it's an abscess. You've got it's got 9 heads on it, and it's like this big, sort of thing. So I'm like, okay. So, well, so can you do something about it? She said, well, yeah, I'll try and squeeze the stuff out. Oh man, it's like it hurt. She squeezed stuff out that hit the wall behind me, under pressure. So it's like, so that was one day. She said, you need to come back, tomorrow, just to see if it's. So I come back tomorrow, and she said, oh no, it's just as bad. So in the end, she called the doctor, and he said, oh, she basically got a scalpel out and she cut it open, lacerated it, cut it open. So I had an inch and a half wound on my back, you know. So all of this is like, you've got to take captive the issues, because it could have been, oh no, I won't be able to travel. I won't be able to go on the holiday. So none of that, the reality was I was going on holiday. This will be fine. It'll get sorted. I'm said to my wife, well, actually, you're going to have to need to pack this, because they shoved a whole load of packing in it, because now is a big scar and is open. So it's like, they put me on antibiotics. So I was like, well, do I need to take them? And I felt, yeah, no, it's okay to take these. I haven't got time to mess around here. I'm going to enjoy my holiday. I'm not going to be focused on trying to deal with this issue. So it was okay. And by the time, I'd got into the second week, it had all healed up. There was no infection. It had all sorted out. So sometimes you just have to go with the flow, that's there. Now, what that mustn't do is create doubt in you. Okay, well, if the enemy can do this to you, it wasn't the enemy. It's just sometimes things happen. I couldn't scrub my back, I guess, that far down. So at the end of the day, it got a blocked pore. It's just, if I had longer arms, I could probably scrub my back, or I'd get one of those loofah things and clean my back better. It's sometimes things just happen. Don't over spiritualize it, but actually deal with it. So once I had the scar and everything, then I focused, when I took communion, on bringing health to that. And, it really did heal up really quite quickly. I love making my wife squirm. So it was quite funny that she had to pack this thing, and because she was just like, ugh. Unfortunately, we were staying over with my daughter before we flew, and she's a nurse. So she showed her what to do. You know, but it was all good. It all worked out and all fine. You know, now there are sometimes, you know, I've cut myself with, you know, the last time I really seriously cut myself was with a table saw, you know, and I took, you know, half of my nail right off. Well, I took my whole nail right off, and, you know, a big chunk of my finger out, you know, and, you know, so I was like, okay, do I, you know, so I, you know, I just sort of, I looked down, or didn't want to look down, thinking of, have I got a finger left? But I did. So I got my daughter to wrap it up because I had work to carry on doing. And she said, you need to go to hospital. And I actually thought in that instance, I really felt, no, I don't need to go to hospital. I'll deal with this. So I finished doing the work, and then I started at work, and I started at work on the finger, and I started to actually choose to create the reality where this was going to be healed. Now, I started to think, do I need a miracle? Do I just want this to go? And God said, no, show people the process. Show people that you can see this healed supernaturally quicker than would be possible. So I did. So I started speaking life to it. When I took communion, I started directing that to this finger. And then I showed people at work. And they were like, oh, this look, because it was a mess. You know, the whole nail was ripped off. There was a big chunk missing. So, you know, so I showed them, and they were like, oh, cover it up, you know. So I said, look, you know, this is going to be restored. And, you know, within 2 weeks, the whole nail grew back and the whole thing. And I've got this tiny little just reminder of the scar, you know, because I focused on supernatural restoration, not a miracle in that instance, but a process that I was able to speed up because of my attention on it. You know, you know. So, you know, there's a whole lifestyle involved in it. It's not just, you know, you can't live in denial, but you also don't have to live in acceptance, you know, and you do the work to make sure that there are no hidden triggers, switches within your genetics or epigenetic factors that could trigger disease, whether it be heart disease or kidney disease or any disease within your physical body. You make sure that you apply the body and blood of Jesus to deal with that, the frequency of health, life contained within that body, and the resurrection power of the body and blood of Jesus, that apply it, and apply it, you know, specifically. I apply it to my, you know, family line factors that make, you know, things, because, you know, but I'm not in fear, you know, I'm not doing it out of fear. I'm doing it because I intend not to die. So any factor that might influence death, I don't intend to have any authority over me. You know, so so yes, it's a lifestyle really, and that encompasses thinking, emotions, living in a healthy way.
So too, when you do your meditation and you actually have love flowing all over your body and every organ, that actually increases your frequency too. So you get help.
Absolutely. It's all part of living from that place of rest, knowing that God loves me, therefore God doesn't want anything negative to happen to me. You know, and I trust him for his protection. Should something happen to me, then I can be at work to put it right, you know. But I'm not expecting anything, you know. And as I say, most of what I do is, you know, usually my fault from some accident or carelessness or not actually looking after myself, you know. But generally, I have a healthy view of life. Therefore, you know, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So I think healthily, you know. So, yeah. Okay. Any other things you want to talk about?
Mike, in your Vision Destiny,
Yep.
mentioned something about storehouses. And you said that once they are correctly founded, they would be ready to receive the harvest of the next generation. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. I think this sort of whole subject really aligns itself with the Joshua generation and the Joshua's generation's role to prepare to be mentors for the next generation, to establish embassies of heaven on earth, or ecclesias that are going to become storehouses that can receive that harvest. So you need the foundation right to establish what size of storehouse it needs, and this comes back to the Joshua generation also being the Joseph generation, if you like, that Joseph was hidden in obscurity in the prison, being prepared to be thrust onto the world stage in authority to begin to create the wisdom to create storehouses to receive 20% of the harvest. And in that story, obviously, as a result of them taking 20% of the harvest into the storehouses, that then when the famine came, they had plenty enough, and all the world came to receive that storage that they had. Not only were they did he bless Egypt, he also blessed his family, and he blessed the world who came to Egypt, which was godly wisdom in establishing that. And so I believe God wants our ecclesias to be seen in the perspective of storehouses. But you don't build a storehouse until the foundation is right. And there's the same thing with the ecclesia. The living stones come together on the foundation of, the 3 and the 7, and the solid foundation of relationship. And it's that which will enable us to receive a harvest, because that harvest will come into a relational foundation which will enable it to flourish and come into sonship. So we need to be ourselves examples of the sonship as foundations that then others can come into. It's discipleship. So another name for, a storehouse would be a discipleship house, and in a sense, a place where sons can be matured into their mature sonship role in heaven and on earth. So it's not just any relationship, because you can have a foundation of relationship, but it doesn't have within it the DNA of a storehouse. So it doesn't have that concept built within what you're doing from the beginning. So as you're establishing relationship, you're establishing that relationship so that you can give that a relationship away to others, and then they can give it away to others. So that must be within the DNA of what you do, that they have that in view, and I think that then will become, when the harvest is ready. I think, is the harvest going to be ready before the storehouses are ready? No. Because what's the point of having a harvest that's going to rot before it gets a chance to be brought in? So God knows the timing of things, and he is waiting for us to establish those storehouses, so then he can actually then give us the strategy for reaching the harvest, calling the harvest in. I wouldn't want to be calling the harvest into an incomplete storehouse with no foundation. What would be the point? Because it wouldn't function in its correct purpose to be therefore a blessing to the rest of the world, because that's ultimately what we want to have the harvest for. They are the harvesters, aren't they, for the next generation? So we must have built into it a ends of the earth, or a wider sphere than just our own little patch. So it's got to be an increasing expansion. Same with, an embassy of heaven. It's expanding the territory of heaven on earth, not just maintaining it and fighting it. So inherently built into the storehouse thing is, this is so we can receive, equip, and release and expand, not just have enough for our needs, so therefore, I think the way in which we look at the harvest must be aligned with the way God looks at the harvest, which is through the lens of love. Not that we need a harvest so we can do this, do this, do this, and we're looking for a workforce. No, we're looking for brothers and sisters and family. So the storehouse really is a family thing. And I think a lot of visionary sort of churches that have vision, and even, heavenly vision, but apostolic vision, can be looking for a workforce to help them fulfill that vision. That isn't the motivation for being a storehouse. It must be for the benefit of the fruit that's going to come in, not the benefit of the house. And that the attitude is different. And I've seen a lot of good vision spoiled because people are forced into fulfilling that in a role which is not really theirs. So they're manipulated or pressured into fulfilling some sort of role that's needed. And if you're looking at the fruit is you want that fruit to be an outworking of the person's destiny, not the visionary's destiny. So it's very important to see the foundations must be established on the desire to disciple those into their inheritance in God themselves, and not just to give us a bigger workforce to get things done, because that would be a wrong heart motivation in it all, which means you have to deal with all that stuff within yourself, and you have to deal with the foundations have to deal with why do they want growth? How much growth do they want? What's the purpose of it? Because I do believe once we've got a solid foundation, God can add overnight. He can supernaturally, draw people to the sound, the frequency that you're releasing and have there. And he's capable of doing that. He's also capable of giving strategies for reaching a harvest, for harvesting. But the key is getting that foundation ready to be the storehouse. And that requires people. It's not a structure, it's people. And it's people's hearts and attitudes and desires to be able to help and encourage and disciple others and bless others and empower others and release others, which really is the key to that foundation. And I think you have to talk about that at the beginning. You got to talk about what happens when people come, and how are we going to treat people, and what's our heart towards people, and how can we, part of our vision here is to help people find and fulfill their destiny. Well, that has got to be something which is inherently built into the foundation and carried within the heart of the foundation, if that is going to be outworked, because it's got to be unity of heart and mind and purpose in it. So, it takes time for all that. Much longer than you think. Well, for us here, we got to, 7 years into this process and looking to transition from an old to a new structure and old mindsets to new mindsets, and taught a lot of practical things of how you engage heaven and how you do court cases and all of those things. But everyone's hearts weren't actually really on board with the overall vision of it. And so people are still consumers, and it's quite hard when people are consumers because they want you to feed them or meet their needs, and that consumerism is never going to produce a storehouse which is going to be filled, because that's what people will see and that's what people will then be discipled into. So, God spoke to me really and said, well, if you knew 7-8 years ago what you now know, what differences would you have made? How would you have done it differently? So I thought, well, very differently. We would have done things in a much more relational way, in a much more foundational way. Our Venture 3 and Venture 7 would have been established in a relational way. So God said, well, why don't you do it now? So I was like, oh, okay. And he said, well, you better get out of the way to help facilitate that. So was like, oh, okay, I'll step out of the way then. I'll step down from that, and then let's see the more relational people establish relationship in a governmental relationship way, so that then we would be able to actually have a strong relational foundation that would actually be able to take what we're doing in a different way, and therefore deconstruct the structure, which was much the same as any other structure. And that's the problem. You're transitioning mindsets, belief systems, trying to establish relationship. You're trying to do all that in the same structure that you were always doing it in. You may have tried to have a different foundation, but you're still pretty much doing the same sort of thing. So in this period, God then said, why are you gathering? What's the purpose of gathering? What is this relationship all about? Why do you do what you do? And God then starts to stir people, and they get discontented with what's going on. And I was pretty discontented. I was bored with it all. It was just like same old, same old, same old. Yeah, really excellent worship, but is that it? Why do we need to sing? Why would someone need to preach? Why do we need to do any of it? Well, because we do, because that's what it is, isn't it? Well, no, it doesn't have to be. So in the process of let's establish a new foundation, let's actually remove all the structure of how we do that, or what forum it's going to be done in, or, so that this can be facilitated in a different way. So do I believe that you need to gather? Well, can't really have a relationship unless you gather together in some way. But is the liturgy of that gathering rigid, or is it flexible? So ours was, okay, we thought it was flexible, but pretty much we had some singing, someone spoke, and we had some activations and did some stuff. That was it. We have a menu of very few items that we sort of juggled around a bit now and again, but pretty much it's the same menu. So when you go and ask God, well, what do you want to do on Sunday when we gather? Or whenever you gather, whether it's a Friday night or whenever it happens to gather, what do you want to do? Well, our expectation is that he's going to tell us to do one of 4 or 5 things. And you don't have that much outside of that until you're willing for God to say anything to you. And therefore, you're willing to challenge the comfort zones of being able to run meetings, because we've run meetings for years, and therefore we're very familiar with how to run meetings. So all of that, basically, we remove the assumptions and, okay, God, what do you want to do? Last Sunday, we had a brunch. So people brought food, we had brunch together, no music, no teaching, a load of really great conversations. I sat down on a table with some people from our therapeutic community, had an excellent conversation with them over various things. Great. This week we had Carrie Browning here doing stuff on, toxic emotions and doing that. So that was, we had a mandate to do that. So no problem. We had no singing, so we don't have to do something just because that's how we've always done it. I'm not opposed to singing. I like singing, in fact. But just because I like it doesn't mean that God wants it every week. So it's so easy to get into a conditioned rut of, well, this is it. Rather than, hey, God, inspire what we do, how we do it, when we do it, and let it be fully creative coming out of your heart. And we're not going to put barriers, boundaries, or restrictions on it, or limitations on it. We want to hear you, and we want to go with it. Now, I've stepped out of that, so I don't get involved with making those decisions, but I'm available for help for those who want it. And our Bench of Seven, who is managing this process, one of the things they asked me was, would I be willing to do a mentoring group with people? I'm like, well, yeah, I definitely have a mandate to do that. How would you like me to do it? So from perspectives is seeking different ways. And also, every ecclesia inherently should be different because it's made up of different people and a different foundation of people. So it should be different with a different blueprint and different mandates. So why should it all look the same? It doesn't need to look the same. So our outworking of that is also in what we do, in doing, our work in the community, our therapeutic community. It's awesome to see people from our therapy community engaging. Yesterday, they were engaging with, essential oils. And, one of the guys on our community had a releasing toxic emotion, had an amazing experience with that. It's like, is that not as much ecclesia as, oh, well, we gather and someone's going to preach at us? Is it not an expression of the heart and love of God to people, to care for them and minister to them in that way? I think, yeah, there's a way that these storehouses are not all going to look the same, be the same, do the same things as it should be. And we just got to be open for a little bit more creativity, I think, in not putting our sort of restrictions on what God might or might not want to do. It's uncomfortable and it gets you out of the comfort zone, and you have to have people who are willing to get out of the boat and walk on the water rather than being in the comfort zone of, well, we know how to run a meeting, we know how to speak, whatever. So when we have had things like that, we've had them interactive. So it's not just someone lecturing, and it's not just a lecture and then an activation. They're interactive discussion and sharing as we do, which makes it more engageable. And, and because we've got 15 or 20 people every week who are from our therapeutic community, you've got a whole load of people and guys who really don't have much of a background in a lot of stuff. So they're very good at telling you the truth of what they see and feel and whatever. So, we asked, well, what do you think about church before you came here? And most of their responses, well, we didn't think it was like this. And one guy actually said, well, I was an atheist when I came here, but then within a week, living in a community where stuff is going on all the time, it got me to question, well, why do I not believe in God? When people are talking about it, I don't believe it. Then he realized that his father had conditioned him and programmed him into atheism as a kid. And then he encountered God. And that somewhat challenged the views of atheism when he had an encounter with God, and a number of encounters with God, which he's no longer an atheist. So, but he was free to share, hey, I didn't believe any of this stuff, but something is at work, and my mind is changing, and I'm softening to this because I can't deny what I'm experiencing, So, that's pretty good, pretty awesome to have those type of experiences and testimonies and encouragement in which we need to have a much more interactive way of doing it. Now, how possible that is, should you be 100 people, 200 people? I don't know. And that's why I'm not convinced in the bigger model of things, and probably more, how do you continue to maintain really strong relational connections and grow? And I think ultimately, Jesus, yeah, he did speak to a few hundred people at times, but he always defaulted back to hey, I'm hanging out with the 12 and some of the other people who are around that, and we are living this out together. So I do believe the storehouses can be collections of houses where people are fellowshipping and engaging, and maybe those houses won't be big enough to house more, so then you'll need more houses or more smaller gatherings or groups of people that can maintain that relational outworking, which is a replication of the initial 10 or more people that you first had to establish a foundation. And I think Jesus, Jesus pretty much gave us a sort of fairly good model of discipleship. Engage with a small group of people and live this out. So I think the big mega church structure is more man's invention than God's, really. And those that have a lot of people but can maintain the real strong relational connection probably do it through home groups, or cell groups, or whatever you want to call them, which are the functional life. And sometimes a celebration of our life together is great, but it's not really the life. It's a celebration of something that's happening integrally all the time, that we have a large celebration to celebrate that isn't the real thing. And I think we've made the real thing, and then the rest of it's sort of tagged on or not. And I think we need to get back to living house to house and fellowshipping in relationship with one another in a more, I think, expandable model. If we're going to multiply, increase, multiply, fill, then you have to have something, I think, that it's possible to multiply. And I'm not sure you can multiply the large gathering type model in a way. Yes, you can go and church plant, but if you're going, most church planting type things are franchises. So they all really have to be modeled after the franchisee. So the mother church, I think it should be more organic than that and more relational. And I do believe God wants to facilitate that. And that's why, hey, let's start with small groups and of people and lay a foundation and then multiply that foundation relationally amongst others. So that's how I sort of would perceive a storehouse and its DNA, really. So. Okay. Anything else?
Very quick question.
Yep.
I don't know if it's a quick answer, but I'm sure you can make it quick. When we're dealing with our neural pathways, one way to do it, I think, is you're probably asking God to search your heart, or anytime you're unsettled, where am I not in alignment, then help me work through why am I not. Then there's another thought where if I just have relationship with God alone, keep going, that the neural pathways will straighten themselves out anyway through God.
Well, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to anything, because different things work better in different circumstances in different seasons in our lives. So I find that the relational engagements with God in intimacy have a function of breaking neural pathways, of identifying the wrong belief systems and mindsets through cognitive dissonance and other sort of mind quakes, that wow, that encounter has just totally shattered my belief system. Well, therefore that neural pathway is then going to attach itself to truth. I don't think trying to change the negative works better than engaging the positive and allowing the positive to replace the negative. Because if you keep trying to change and break neural pathways that are linked to negative mindsets, belief systems, then you're just focusing on them. And when you're focusing on something, that's what multiplies. So I think focus on the positive. If you're looking to deal with something, you get a verdict, let's say you do a court case, then the verdict becomes what replaces the behavior or the lie or the thinking pattern. So focus on the verdict, and that will actually break the pathway and establish that as what links to that pathway. without, I'm going to try and break open these neural pathways. No, really focus on the reality of the truth, because the truth deals with lies. Don't try and get rid of the lies. Embrace the truth. That's why embracing Jesus, the truth, will inherently change us to become that which we behold, and that will break the pathways to wrong belief systems about him and about ourselves, because the truth will be unveiled. And when the truth is unveiled, it's really obvious to see, where the lies are. But then just keep focusing on the truth, and the truth will replace the lie. And I, again, use communion to have the frequency of the mind of God contained within that life to actually, replace and deal with neural pathways in my mind, in the relational outworking of that I have each day. You know, so I think that to me is how neural pathways get dealt with. Relationship, and that relationship will change us and change our connection to God, and then that will begin to outwork and change the way we think. I used to try and not think a certain way, but the more I tried not to think like that, the more I was actually thinking about it, and it didn't work. So then you take your eyes off what you're trying not to think about and start to think about the positive, the truth, which is in direct opposite to that lie. Therefore, the truth will actually become that which you believe, and the lie will no longer be there. You won't believe it anymore because you now believe the truth. And I think neural pathways connect to truth, and the lies get replaced, because you don't want really to get rid of the neural pathway. You just want the neural pathway to link to the truth. Otherwise, you're going to have to establish a new neural pathway by doing that. So if you've got one already connected to something, just substitute what's at the end of the pathway. And I think court cases do that. Here's the verdict. Okay, well, I'm going to focus on the verdict. So that verdict is going to replace the lie that this behavior triggered me to. So now the triggers are going to lead me to the verdict. I'm free. So I think that I found works better than trying to try and change myself or change how I think. And confessing the truth, to try and believe it, is a hard process. Experiencing the truth enables you to believe it. You then have cognitive dissonance. You experience something which challenges what you've believed, and no longer can you believe it if you're willing to embrace the truth of the experience in that way. So there we go. Okay, all right. I'll leave it there.